Let's go back a little to when Pokemon X and Y were just released, and you're playing through it in awe of the newest entry to Pokemon, except you aren't. Despite it having just introduced some of the most major shakeups to the franchise that is still in effect today. The change to 3D, Pokemon gimmicks, Pokemon Ami, character customization, a brand new type, Wonder Trade, and it all sounds really nice, right? But for some reason, no one acknowledges this for Pokemon X and Y. When people think of X and Y, they talk about how it didn't get a third version or how its evil team felt lackluster, and then is regarded as one of the most generic Pokemon games, despite its overall importance to the franchise. Today, I wanted to discuss what makes Pokemon X and Y so much better than what people remember, at least in my opinion, and give it the appreciation I believe it deserves. First off, let's talk about the change up to 3D. Now let's get something straight. Pokemon has always been decades behind the current gaming market. Did you know that Pokemon Red and Blue, technically green, were released in Japan the same year as Mario 64? So yes, by the time Pokemon came out, it was already a relic. But no one cared about that for years. So what changed? Well, I'd love to hear what you think since I wasn't there when it happened, but if I had to guess, people were probably too young to really make these comparisons with Pokemon and, other games. So as long as it was fun, it didn't matter to them. Then now, when all of those people are long grown up, they want Pokemon to be up to the same standards as the other franchises. Understandably so. In any case, Pokemon made their leap to 3D with X and Y, and given my nostalgia bias of it being my first Pokemon game, I gotta say I love the models. While it may not appeal to those who are with the franchise prior to X and Y, I know a lot of people have complaints that, it was a bit washed out, and I'm sure like the changes because, they grew up seeing all these sprites always in 2D, and now it's suddenly in 3D. I'm sure it gave a lot of fans whiplash. At the end of the day, it still appealed to me, which was technically the target audience, a new audience. To me, they look bubbly, and I was able to project whatever personalities I wanted onto them to give them a lot more life. And here's the thing, they could have stopped there with just making new models, making Pokemon 3D. That could have just been the sole selling point, but they didn't just stop there. Pokemon Ami took what was before a couple of sprites or models to a new height never seen before for Pokemon. Interactability, a way to really build a bond with your Pokemon. Up to this point, the most interactability you had was maybe a few mini games like with Pokemon contests or the Pokemon shows, whatever they were called in Pokemon Black and White, I forgot, which was nice, but there was really something missing at the end of the day with that, right? And what's crazy is Pokemon Ami still sees its effects today, where in every new generation since, they have done some type of remodeling of this feature. In fact, this is what I find most impressive about it. Despite overhauling the entire development process for making Pokemon games, they still managed to make features that are still lasting today. Regional gimmicks are especially a great example of that, for they are what most people are generally most excited for with each new generation, or at the very least more interested in, seeing, like, ooh, what's the next regional gimmick gonna be, right? And Mega Evolution is still the most highly regarded of all of them. In addition, character customization, the Fairy type, and Wonder Trade all came from Pokemon X and Y. Not to mention how X and Y's online system is still one of the most highly regarded amongst Pokemon fans. And keep in mind, these are just the things that have had a super lasting effect on the franchise. So onto the actual game itself. First, the region Kalos. This is one of the more unanimously agreed parts of the game. Most Pokemon fans will agree that Kalos itself is a stunning region, and in my opinion, the route design is full of varying elevations and all left a big impression on my younger self. I remember just having all these different puzzles and just unique things to do with each route. It all had a sense of beauty and tranquility that I've never experienced in Pokemon since. The towns and cities also felt like it had nature just shoved into them. The characters too, while not as fleshed out as they could have been, all had a role to play into making the game feeling more grand, which is something I really appreciate. I would say the two most controversial elements that I could think of at least are its postgame and of Team Flair themselves. For the postgame, I would say that's the most understandable, as other than some mini games and little things you could do around the region, there isn't much more for someone who wants to experience a bit more game, if you will. When one sends a gift, for example, it leaves the best impression once the person thinks that's all of it, if there's still more coming their way. That leaves someone really satisfied with the overall product. And X and Y really didn't deliver, especially for the year wait between X and Y and ORAS, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. And not to mention the 2-year gap between Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and Sun and Moon. This, I think, is one of the reasons why people consider X and Y to be so unfinished, simply because it did not last people as long as it should have. But not that the base game itself was lacking. But perhaps I'm making this up and people do have other reasons to believe this. I just remember having a lot of optional areas and even areas that I never even explored myself, despite having played the game so many times, which isn't really something something that we've been getting a lot in Pokemon games lately. Though obviously with open world, that's definitely been changed. In terms of Team Fleer, I find them to be entertaining, and I personally like them slightly a bit more than Team Galactic, but that's probably just me. Pokemon X and Y was also the first game that I'm aware of, at least, that really tried making competitive battling really accessible, so it did a lot in that regard. I think Pokemon X and Y was really important for the health of the franchise moving forward, and it helped pave the path for how some of the most beloved features today look now. I hope Suna could really share some of that spotlight with its associates, and people could really appreciate to go back to it. But of course, it's natural for many want to just move forward and look to the newer games, or even just look back to the ones before X and Y. Like, I think it could really benefit from a Pokemon Z, a third version, just anything new for it to really leave people satisfied with the games. But I doubt that'll really happen, especially with Pokemon Z. I don't think they're gonna do a Pokemon Z because normally Pokemon likes to, you know, they at least haven't yet made a third version for any of their remakes. Maybe a Pokemon Legends game for X and Y is what it needs. That wouldn't really develop the main game, but I mean, it could develop the lore of it, I guess, which I think people would appreciate. So hopefully one day that can happen. I don't think I could put into words how I just feel about Pokemon X and Y. Like, it's just this sort of tranquility with most Pokemon games. And keep in mind, I'm not saying this as a bad thing. I'm just saying each game has their own qualities that pertain to it, and that's not meant to determine what the other games are meant to like look like and how they're meant to feel. I'm just saying for X and Y specifically, I felt like it had a very tranquil and peaceful feeling, while most other games had this more adventurous feeling. And it's something that I really appreciate about X and Y because I feel like most other games don't really have that feeling to them. In any case, I'd love to know what you guys think about Pokemon X and Y. What do you think of my points of the game in general? Do you think that it deserves the generic name calling it does? In any case, let me know. I'd love to hear. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye!